What is up, my Lorcana Goons? This is Zach, and you're here with the Lorcana Goons channel. Normally Kevin would be here, and you guys are probably asking, why is my face in the beginning of a video? It's because I'm here to talk about my deck that I played at the DLC Vegas and made top 64 with. We're here to showcase, you know, everything about Amber Steel and my preparations and everything that I took into account before I chose to play the list that I played. And on the screen here, we're going to be seeing my deck, and we have some card choices to go over. I want to also preface this video first by saying that I understand deck profiles have recently been made with cards being showcased and gone over each individual card. Personally, I really think that this game is more nuanced than that. You have a lot of strategies that you can decide to pilot with, especially in Steel Song. You have an aggro approach, you have more of a control of the game approach, and you always are trying to keep tempo with the board by singing your songs and keeping the board more in your favor. And I'd rather just have it posted up here and to go over every single card in detail. The night before on Friday, I had not put Lantern in my deck. I was playing 4 copies of Daisy Duck, which I liked, and I still do like, going forward into the DLC Seattle and Set Champs this month. However, I didn't want to risk playing the amount of uninkable, or playing more than 28 uninkables. I think I stuck to 19, and Daisy was a card that, even though in testing was one of the main reasons why I was winning some of my games early, I noticed that it wasn't the only reason why. It wasn't a combination of mulliganing patterns and finding your singers in combination with songs, also keeping your power plays like Naveen Whole New World. But later in my games, especially into the red-blue matchup, was just very unfavored for Amber Steel Song. The Daisy doesn't do a lot after turns 1 through 3, and while you're not playing it on turn 1, or if you're not playing 2 on turn 2, you're not going to get ahead in that matchup to where you want to be at 16 lore. You'd love to be at 16 lore, because you can probably deploy up to 4 lore in characters over the course of 2 or 3 turns that they'll have to constantly answer every single one. And Daisy, getting Daisy early was the reason to go that approach. But if you weren't playing against Red-Blue, or if you had to draw Daisy more in the later game when you needed songs or you needed to find a Naveen, it showed a lot in a larger sample size. And again, I played Amber Steel since set 3. I have a lot of experience with this deck, and I feel like it speaks to me personally, because the deck plays functionally and fundamentally like a Yu-Gi-Oh deck would. But in order to take this type of deck to a Lorcana challenge event where you're playing a 2-game format and you each get to go first game 1, you had to play a more greedy style list, and Lantern was the X factor here. Lantern allowed me to essentially go more wide than I would have to, and it sounds redundant, but it was a high roll chance to be able to auto win games when you'd find double Lantern by turn 3. Because in a nutshell, if you have double Lantern by turn 3, you can play Ariel still, and then everything else becomes free. You can play Big Cindy, shift Big Cindy on turn 4, which is crazy. You can play Tinkerbell on turn 4, and it was also a choice to play the one Grab Your Sword, which wasn't in my deck weeks prior up until the event. I literally told everyone that Grab Your Sword will not be in my list, and I played it anyway. So not to say that I was wrong, but there comes a time where decisions have to be made, and the reason why I decided to include the one Grab Your Sword was because I was tired of trying to make my red-blue matchup better when it really just was still bad at any time I would tech against it, right? Cards like I Find My Platinum and the Bare Necessities were in my deck lists leading up to the event, and I had to cut those cards because I wasn't winning even when I resolved them. I wasn't able to win killing or destroying each of their items with I Find My Platinum. It would be really good in the moment, but it wasn't winning the game. And Bare Necessities on 2 can be very strong. Bare Necessities on 2 can be very strong because you are nullifying the Fishbone Quill. If you're on the play, you can hit the 1 jump out of their hand. And Brawl is still a problem. Brawl on Aerial will slow you down. Brawl on Piglets or Daisies will slow you down. But it's not what I'm looking to do on 2, because in order to play it on 2, I have to give up my whole tempo. Or I'm singing with Cinderella, and I don't even want to be playing Cinderella turn 1 against that deck anyway. I cut Bare Necessities as like more to make the deck list like 60 cards, and I also had to cut down Pete to 3. Do I think that was correct? I don't know. It was right in retrospect after playing the matchups I played and the card choices that they decided to play in their deck. But I still think Pete might have to be played as a 4 of. I'm not too sure right now. Currently, I am not looking to play Amber Steel for the next DLC. But anything can change, and I'd hate to speak in absolutes at this point because I made a lot of changes going into the event at Vegas. Other things that I felt like were more standard, of course, like the 4 Aerials, the 3 Naveen's, which I didn't want to add more on Inkables. It's not that I think 4 is bad. It's really good with Lantern. Again, in a 2-game format, you want to increase your chances of getting super lucky, and high rolling is what they call it. We were in Vegas, so why not try to get the luck on your side, right? And I did need it. I was fortunate to dodge red blue all day 1. Like to end my day going up to people and saying, "Hey, I made it. Didn't take a loss and didn't play red blue," and that's all you kind of need to do in these kind of events. Dodge your bad matchups and don't get too owed. Other than the points there, I really liked how well curved the deck list was. I was playing 3 Rapunzel at one point, but I decided to increase it to 4 because I did really want to favor the ink ability that Rapunzel gives me over like a Prince Naveen, for example. And cards that I was testing and I had in and out of my deck list, of course, was a character, Lawrence. Lawrence is a 3-cost character that has 0 strength and 4 willpower with 2 lore, and its ability says that this character will gain 4 strength while it has no damage on it. Now, in a nutshell, pure stat-wise, an insanely valuable card. And I really wish that I had somehow fit copies of Lawrence into my deck, but I had to really consider the curve here. And on turn 3, Aerial is what you want to be doing, and Pete is the second best option. On the draw into Emerald or other Amber Mirror decks, the Pete, in response to like their Singer Aerial play, is really strong. Against Lemon Lime, you would be playing Pete, then you would be potentially picking apart their board with the rest of the songs that you'd have. Pete can sing your 3-cost songs, which is super good. And Pete also has the nuanced ability to like force people to build around it and to prevent Pete from kind of like exposing their weaknesses. And that's part of the reason why I decided to play 3 Pete and not 4. Going into the event, Pete was a 4 of weeks prior, and it was still a contention to be a 4 of in a 61 card deck. And if I would have to play to the 61st card, it would have been the fourth Pete. But I didn't want to go over 61, and 2, I really wanted to respect that like people are aware of Pete and they're making different decisions in their deck building to keep it in mind. And it's a high level event with decisions that you one small decision can affect the rest of your whole tournament experience. If you make one mistake and lose that game, it makes your matchups different from the rest of the game going forward. And it is important to really like solidify like what type of deck you're trying to build and what kind of meta you're trying to play for or play against. And I thought Pete, although being the strongest card in my deck, one of the strongest cards in my deck, needed to have a rethink on the amount of copies I played, because most of my testing circle were already starting to play Let's Be Prepared, especially the red-blue players. More people were conscious in adding more Lady Tremaines in their list rather than B-King Undisputeds for the Ruby Amethyst players on my team. And the last point was I did keep in mind that like Emerald Steel was a deck people were deciding to bring in pilot, especially on Friday. We heard a lot of the side event tables, mostly red, blue, and green steel, but more of like the top represented players were on green steel. That's something to always consider too, is that like the trends usually shift, and we look at players that do consistently well for that advice almost, right? And green steel, a solid pick into the meta, going into red blue being most dominant, amber steel being second most. You had cards like characters like Ursula Deceiver and Pete, games referee, to prevent and to stop the songs from being played in both matchups. So there was a lot of consideration into the decisions of not playing Lawrence and playing only 3 copies of Pete. I liked it again in retrospect, because after I've seen my matchups and playing against my opponents in Swiss, most of them were prepared for Pete, and Pete is just a good answer to Pete. I tell people all the time that like I don't even feel too safe or solid into steel mirrors when I play Pete, because if they Pete me back, and it's basically like playing a game of Connect 4 where you're just blocking each other's win conditions and trying to set up your own. But it becomes more nuanced than that, because Pete can actually swing the board in your favor, preventing characters from singing songs, playing into Ariel or Ursula Deceiver Evolves. It's really strong because it pretty much stops those cards from utilizing their most powerful abilities. And the solid stat line at 3/3 was good enough to have sort of a workaround into the matchups like red-purple when you're having to deal with like locations, for example, or if you need to trade into like rabbits, it still would survive, which again, Rapunzel is a card, and a lot of my opponents were playing around Rapunzel, but it was like, okay, are they going to play around Rapunzel more, or are they going to play around Pete more? And the only thing that I guess won my decision to play for Rapunzel was I can damage my own characters and heal them, and they can't play around that. They simply can't. Like, they can beat me, and that's actually a solid answer. But they cannot stop me from singing my Storm Rage on, damaging my own Ursulas or Ariels, and drawing 2 cards. And I did that a lot. Like, I actually damaged my Ursula for 3 with Strength one game. Like, I was on my 5th turn, I played a character, damaged it for 3, inked and played Rapunzel and drew. And I actually had a comment given to me from my opponent, shoutouts to Iago. He was like, did you play Magic? And no, I played the other card game, the other one. But to me, it's like I said, this deck spoke to me. To round off the deck list, of course, is the 2 Big Cindy and the 2 Tinkerbell. I added the Tinkerbells more in the last minute because I did like its stats into like red-blue. You do find yourself in like a lot of situations where if you were to out aggro them early on and they were to clear the board, characters like Tinkerbell and Big Cindy usually stick outside of a Be Prepared. They need multiple combinations of ice blocks plus removal, or they have to risk getting rid of the whole board. Again, the sweet spot is around 16 lore against that deck, because you can always deploy enough threats to where the game will end if they don't kill everything. Outside of that, the one World's Greatest Criminal Mind was there as like an insurance package, because I didn't have bare necessities in my deck, and I only had like 17 songs, if I remember correctly, in the deck list right now. So the World's Greatest was also like an inkable song, which I valued a lot. Missing off Ariel does happen more often than you can think, and I wanted to respect Shift Clarabelle's, Big Cindy's, and I guess Tamatoa's, even though usually you're finding yourself in losing situations anyway if you have the World's Greatest Criminal Mind and Tamatoa on board. But it does come up. It does come up in those weird grindy situations that you're actually like going back and forth against the red-blue deck. Like, a lot of times milling them out is the win condition. But if you find yourself with like a bunch of characters and they have inked all their cards with Fishbone Quill, you cannot play that whole new world. You just play your hand and see what happens, because they could just draw a bunch of blanks, or they could draw a bunch of Tamatoas that they just can't do anything with. If they're not questing for a large amount of lore, and with a Lucky Dime on board, Tamatoas are forced to trade into my characters. And again, like, Lawrence not being in the deck does make that matchup more of a challenge, where if I added the Tinkerbells and I added the extra Big Cindy, the balance would make sense too, and it's more well-rounded into like a metagame that isn't just red-blue, like oppressively dominant, right? There was still green-purple to consider, there was still ruby-am to consider, there was lemon-lime to consider, and some of these characters actually have like a cheap, they have like a very low willpower, and like Sir Hiss, for example, just dies into the Tinkerbell. If you're high rolling with Double Lantern early on, and you go like Double Lantern Ariel on 3, you have enough ink next turn to play Tinkerbell, and you can sing the Grab Your Sword. It's a one-of in my deck, and again added last minute due to the idea that Green Steel has warded characters, and you're not able to really deal with them unless you have Big Cindy. So Tinkerbell, in combination with the Grab Your Sword, was a way to AoE wipe the board. And it does 3 damage to everything if you had it in combination. You Grab Your Sword by itself doesn't do a lot into a lot of matchups, but that extra damage that you would get from the Tinkerbell is enough to clear like Red Purple's board or Lemon Lime's board if they have coved everything. And that's super important because the Hidden Cove was a card that was in most of the Emerald lists that did well at the DLC in Vegas, and it's a card that I actually learned to take out as early on as turn 2, start swinging into it, because it prevents me from like checking their board, and if it gets too, like if their characters start to get too strong, too strong for my songs to deal with, then I'm losing tempo, which is like not where I want to be at in this deck. I'm looking to deploy threats every turn. I'm looking to empty out my hand via songs and cheap characters and draw 7 new cards with Whole New World. And Whole New World is the only card that disrupts the mulligan. We aren't playing Shift Queen anymore, so we don't have the sing Whole New World on turn 2. But you have Lantern Naveen to sing it on 3. And fortunately, even though it was one of the lines I took into my top 64 match, shoutouts to Daniel Holt. He was able to defeat me in the 3rd game. It felt like my game to win. Like, I'm only going to waste 6 cards, and they're only going to waste 6 cards. They went first and ink passed with red-blue. No 1-drop items, no nothing. I don't have the hand to beat it. I already knew I lost the moment I ink passed back. If I wasn't playing a Robin Hood or a Daisy in response to their turn 1 into Piglet and like Smee Daisy, I'm not winning that game. Unfortunately, I'm not. And the writing was on the wall immediately as I saw my hand. Played it out, of course, to just kind of see what would happen. And, I'd hate to scoop when the game's not over. And as something that I kind of want anybody that's still watching and listening to keep in mind is that time is important, but when you have a lot of time, you do not concede early. You play that out because you never know what can happen. People can make different decisions. And what's talked about a lot too is that sometimes in the heat of the moment, not everyone is able to see the right line of play, and they could make a mistake. Those are things to really just like consider in a high intense tournament environment, is that not everyone is playing perfectly. Not everyone is on top of their game, and we're all human. We can definitely make a mistake and not see something right away. And unfortunately, there are very few instances where I believe things should be rewound in a game state. I don't implore people to take advantage and shark people. It is important to make the game pleasant and remind people for anything that's mandatory that has to happen. But optional triggers, things that can be missed, is a different story. I had a friend tell me that they played a Merlin Goat and passed back their turn and goes, "Oh, I'm at 14 or 15 lore," and their opponent said, "No, you didn't mark that lore. We're in my next turn already," and lo and behold, the judge's ruling was that the lore gain was missed. The trigger was missed. So just kind of as a friendly reminder to not miss your triggers, to record and announce all your actions, which is super important. I know that the bag was kind of like shown on display this past week, the past DLC weekend, in Zen Sayed's final feature match. The bag is not something that I have misunderstood or took like as overcomplicated in any way. To me, it's as simple as it was described. You take all the abilities that were triggered in this, throw them in the bag, and turn player takes out each ability in order they want to. And in order for any other ability to trigger, everything in the bag must be resolved first. And that's always important to keep in mind, that you're resolving your triggers and gaining as much information as possible. Characters like the Muses will bounce cards, but the Prince John will also draw cards, so you'd rather get the information that's private before you make a decision that essentially doesn't change. Information won't change no matter what, outside of the card you're drawing for turn. And none of these situations or circumstances came up too much in my matches or with my deck, but things to consider, right? Missed triggers. Robin Hood banishing a character, gaining lore is a trigger that you don't want to miss. You always want to make sure you're writing down that 2 lore gain every time you kill something in a challenge with Robin Hood. You can miss it, right? And it's something that you'd like to always prevent and think about. Pete Pete's ability that on play prevents the opponent from playing actions during their next turn isn't something that isn't missed, but if you're not catching or reminding opponents that, hey, the action they just attempted to play has to be returned to their hand, then it goes on. If its next turn passes, you don't get to rewind that anymore. These rules are a lot more clear, guys, and in another video we will kind of go over some of the things to keep in mind. But right now I want to send us off with 2 different things. First is shout outs to Pristine Protection TCG. They're the sponsors of today's video. Kevin and I use Pristine Protection whenever we go out to the events, and we are going to start using the inner sleeves as well. So the inner sleeves go inside of the main sleeve, and you do that as a way to like protect your cards. You hear it countless times that like people are playing with enchanteds, playing with cold foils, and you want to preserve the value of these cards. You know the value quite well. The market watches that we make tell you so. So please get yourself Pristine Protection sleeves from pristineprotectiontcg.com, and if you use promo code Goons10, you will save 10% off your order. And you can't go wrong with a deal, guys. As well as the shirts, they are finally here. The shirts that you've seen us wear at the DLC events, the Goons, and we got the inspiration from the discard cards, and they are available. Please check out our store on YouTube, and if you catch any of us in person, we got some shirts on us, so feel free to reach out. There are limited quantities available, but we're looking to have more of a demand and more of a print for them. And we are listening to feedback, guys, so please, if you guys are ordering shirts, if you guys are buying the Pristine Protection sleeves, leave a comment down below, your experiences and how you guys like them. Again, this is the deck profile that I've been looking to make after the DLC in Vegas. It was a little bit longer than I wanted to take into kind of going over it, but I felt like it was important to kind of put my thoughts and everything that every decision that led up into me playing this list. Again, I was very comfortable with the deck before the event came up. I had experience playing it during the Atlanta DLC. I played it all throughout Set 3 and won a Set 3 championship with it. A lot of the cards actually haven't changed since around then, like Naveen, Pete's, and Daisies I think are the newest additions. I wasn't playing Lawrence back then either. We had the Shift Queen, which was very good for Whole New World. And just remember, guys, Whole New World is still the only card that disrupts mulligans, and you can't beat that. Appreciate everyone here that stayed to the end of the video to listen to my thoughts, and please feel free to ask questions about Amber Steel. I have a Twitter, Zachstone Brand. Message me there. I'm always looking to play test, so if you guys wanted to get some games in, feel free to ping me in our Discord server. We have a channel for remote webcam games, and it's really fun to just kind of play with fellow Goons, guys, so please reach out. Until then, this is Zach Stone with Lorcana Goons. We'll see you Goons next time.